All right, so good morning. My name is Cameron Davignon, and I'm an M.B.A. candidate at Quinnipiac University. Welcome to this morning's highly anticipated keynote panel, Hedge Fund Industry Outlook, Challenges and Opportunities. The first panelist this morning is Evan Katz. Mr. Katz is Managing Director of Crawford Ventures, a leading Manhattan-based alternative asset investment firm that forms, grows, holds interest in, and raises very substantial investor capital for compelling hedge funds, private equity funds, and other alternative investment funds. Katz was voted and nominated by the hedge fund industry as its best fundraiser in both the 2021 and 2022 Hedge Week Awards. He earned his JD in securities law, corporate law, and intellectual property law from Harvard Law School, and his BS in finance and economics from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Please welcome Mr. Evan Katz. Second panelist is Anthony Scaramucci. Mr. Scaramucci is the founder and managing partner of SkyBridge, a global alternative investment firm, and founder and chairman of SALT, a global thought leadership forum and venture studio. Prior to founding SkyBridge in 2005, Scaramucci co-founded the investment partnership Oscar Capital Management, which was sold to Neuberger Berman in 2001. Earlier, he worked in private wealth management at Goldman Sachs. Scaramucci served on President Donald Trump's 16-person presidential transition team executive committee, and in 2017, briefly served as chief strategy officer of the Export-Import Bank and White House communications director. He earned his JD from Harvard Law School and a BA from Tufts University. Please welcome Mr. Anthony Scaramucci.
Well, thank you for that warm introduction. And it's great to be here. We're going to have a very interesting, roughly hour-long conversation and Q&A with Anthony. We're going to start off with a little bit of background and then dive into a bunch of things regarding hedge funds. And in addition to that, some other things that may be going on in the world. Speaking of going on in the world, I guess my first question for Anthony is, where in the world is Anthony Scaramucci today?
It's nice to be here, Evan. Thank you guys for having me. I had to speak at the, it's called the FII conference down here in Miami, because I have clients down here. So I apologize for not being there in person, and I appreciate you guys letting me do this on Zoom. FII is the, I would say, one of the leading Middle Eastern conferences. They do it in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, every October. But they're doing a mini conference down here. My friend Mayor Suarez, the mayor of Miami, is sort of leading the delegation here. And it's a good event. Lots of hedge fund managers here, venture capital, et cetera.
Well, sounds great. You go and speak at a lot of conferences, but if you do want your badge from this one, I do have it and can give it to you when you're back. When you're back in your.
That's the deal.
It is in safekeeping. So first, as I said, I'd like to proudly introduce Anthony Scaramucci, a renowned hedge fund expert, former White House Director of Communications, and also reality television star. Three words that don't usually combine hedge fund events, but it's going to be an interesting conversation. Also, lest I forget, a big thank you not only to Anthony, but to Quinnipiac University, the faculty and students who planned this more than 1,000 attendee event, including the events team. And of course, Osman, who is leading this entire event, and Anthony, as you can kind of see on the Zoom, there's 1,000 college and MBA students in suits, so it's a pretty serious crowd. Initially, just to give the audience
how many pot smokers in the room? Okay, raise your hands. Let me see how many pot smokers. See? Oh, look at all the liars in that room, Evan. See that? Did you catch that? All right, go ahead. Keep going. Keep going, Evan. Keep going.
It is legal in New York State, I believe. So actually,
no, it's all right. But I mean, they know I'm old enough to be the dad, and so that's the first thing I'm going to say. And I don't want to interrupt Evan, but the first thing I'm going to say is, you guys are young enough to be my kids. Don't smoke pot. Okay, it rots your brain, and it'll slow you down, and you will lose your competitive edge. And so you're all looking there, snickering to each other. And tonight you're going to hit a blunt somewhere, but don't do it, because if you want to be successful. Okay, you need all of your brain, not a part of your brain. And that shit makes you lazy and paranoid. Okay, so the number one thing I will tell you is cut the pot out. Okay, all right, keep going, Evan.
Well, actually, Anthony, that may be the reason you're putting two and two together, because I'm one of the only 4 or 5 of my own friends who have never gotten high. And we actually are running the world #1 top-ranked hedge fund on planet Earth for several years. So maybe there's a connection between not getting high and running the top hedge fund.
It could be. It could be.
Well, speaking of Q&A, just to give the audience a heads up, when Anthony and I were preparing for this, I did ask him, would you like to hear some of the questions in advance? You could get an idea of the topics and prepare for things. And Anthony said, absolutely, positively not. Do not want to know the questions in advance. It makes it more stilted. So you're going to get Anthony Scaramucci unscripted. This is sort of the live album, not the studio album. This is the live album. Quick question first, out of the audience of a couple hundred people here in this session, how many have ever worked at a hedge fund, want to work at a hedge fund, have relatives who've worked at a hedge fund? Just out of curiosity, anyone yet, or it's mostly curiosity? All right, about 5%, I would say. Okay, fair enough. Initially, just a bit of a heads up to the audience, Anthony and I have at least 3 things in common. We both grew up on Long Island, about 5 miles apart. We both attended Harvard Law School, and we both are not practicing lawyers anymore. Actually, to Anthony's credit, he is much smarter than I. He never practiced law. I did, so the subtitle of this hedge fund panel could be How to Talk You Out of Going to Law School. However, since this is the business people and the M.B.A. people, my guess is that's probably not in your agenda, but so be it. Anthony, before we dive into hedge funds and everything else, just a couple of quick background questions. Obviously, you've been the subject of a lot of press, but I'm curious about young Anthony. I guess that kind of reminds me of, was it Young Sheldon, the TV show? Could you share with the audience 1 or 2 things about young Anthony under the age of 16, 18, what you were like as a kid, what hobbies or clubs you were in, something that hasn't made it into your Wikipedia profile yet, although maybe it will after this session. What was Anthony like?
So, people have a tendency to remember things the way they need to, not the way they actually happened. And so I'll try to be brutally honest with myself. And I would recommend all the students, be brutally honest with yourself, because if you do that, you'll be able to improve yourself, and you'll be each day becoming a better and better version of yourself. But when I was 16, I was a bit of a pain in the ass to my parents. I had high grades, but I wasn't studying that much. And I was very distracted by sports. And I was also, because I grew up in a blue collar family, the family, my dad had a middle class income. We were doing okay, but we always needed a little bit of extra money. So I had jobs probably from the age of 13. I had a paper route. They don't let young kids do that anymore, but I had a Newsday paper route. I was a stock boy at the local grocery store. My uncle had a motorcycle shop, so I was selling mopeds and helmets for mopeds and accessories when I was sort of in that age, sort of 14, 16, 17. I wasn't doing that well in school, but I had high test scores. I ended up getting into a few colleges. I had a choice between going to a state school or to Tufts University. And my parents really didn't have a lot of money, but I made the decision to go to the private college, to Tufts University up in Boston. And Evan, I will never forget this. It was April of 1982, so it's 41 years ago. My dad handed me a check. It was a $10,000 check from a life insurance company. And I said, Dad, what is this? He said, well, I cashed in my union life insurance because I don't really have a lot of money to pay for your college tuition, but I can get you started with $10,000. Now, the tuition at Tufts at that time was 24. I don't know, it could be 80 today. But I just remember him handing me that check, and I'm like, okay, my dad just cashed in his life insurance. So I got to take the college part of my life very, very seriously and not do what I've been doing here in high school. And so when I got to college, I took it very, very seriously. And thankfully, I had good grades, and it gave me the opportunity to get into Harvard. So I guess one big message to everybody: there's a lot of fun in life, and there's a lot of things that you can do other than your studies or improving yourself, improving your diet, your exercise regimen, the quality of friends that you're hanging out with. You are the weighted sum average of the 5 or 6 people that you hang out with. If you're hanging out with losers, you're going to end up as a loser. Okay. And so if you start thinking like that today, you will build the habits of success for yourself, and you will hang out with people that will help you reinforce those habits, and you'll help each other. But it took an event like that for me. It took my dad basically telling me, look, man, I have no money, but I'm willing to give up my life insurance to help you get your life started. That got me really in gear to start studying and taking things more seriously.
That's quite compelling. And if I recall correctly, was it your generation that was the first in your family to go to college as well?
First in the family to go to college, first in the family to go to law school. I mean, maybe that's the same with you, Evan, but I was the first. And my brother and I both went to Tufts together. It was a fun time, very good experience, very different culture in the 1980s than today. It was less sensitized, less woke, less, you can't even, you're afraid to say things anymore because, you're afraid, you call some kind of riot or, because people are so sensitive now with their like eggshell personalities. But back then it actually didn't matter. I was flying home from Athens last week. I was visiting a client in Athens, and I was watching Anchorman, which was made in like 2005. You can't even make a movie like that anymore. So we've lost our way a little bit. The culture has become crazy. But back in the 80s, it was a very different university. Tufts was a different place than it is today.
Well, we'll have to talk offline. I actually had several friends who went there. I spent a lot of time in Miller Carmichael and Ballou Hall. We can have a Tufts conversation offline. Before we dive into your career, one question, you've heard praise your question, so I just want to put it out there. As a child or otherwise, did anyone ever, and does anyone ever still call you Tony?
So, the weird story, but my first grade teacher called me Tony. And for some reason, it inflamed my Italian-American grandmother and my Italian-American mother. Actually, my grandmother was more Italian than American. And they marched on the school, and they told the first grade teacher they couldn't call me Tony. And so it was sort of embarrassing, to be honest. But anyway, there was a big sticker on my folder as it got passed from the 1st to 6th grade that I had to be called Anthony. So not a lot of people have ever called me Tony. I don't mind it, but it's just never a name that stuck with me. I think you'll enjoy this. How did I get the nickname Mooch? Well, I had this like very politically incorrect German phys ed teacher. I mean, the guy was like a little bit of a lunatic Nazi, frankly, and he hated everybody that had ethnic names. And so if you had a 4-syllable last name, this guy was like torturing you. This was 1972. It's like 51 years ago. So he used to take one of the syllables of your last name, and then that was your moniker. That was your nickname. So I have 4 syllables of my last name. It's Scaramucci. So he was calling me Mooch, when I was 8 years old, and that name stuck with me. So when I was in the White House, and so for some people, Mooch is a pejorative, like I'm going to mooch off you. The liberal press loved that. They thought that was like the greatest thing. So they were calling me Mooch like it was going to irritate or bother me. I was like looking at them like, Coach Tepper, the wild maniac German guy, was calling me that in the 2nd grade. Didn't bother me. Okay. And so another learning lesson for the young people listening in, don't be a baby. Okay. If someone calls you a name, or they say something about you, or they do something, don't be a baby, just roll with it. Okay. Let the stuff roll off your back. It's a short life. As Mel Brooks, the American comedian, says, relax. None of us are getting out of here alive. Okay. All these little micro aggressions and indiscretions and all this stuff, just let it go. Okay. Focus on yourself and getting yourself the career arc and the dream and the aspiration that you want in your life.
And to your point too, it's a point well taken. I won't tell you the whole story, but I'm very good friends with 2 sisters. There was a bit of an inside joke, and one of them was kind of getting upset by it all the time. The other one went with the joke and just started adopting it. And I never teased her again about it all. But the other sister who kept getting bent out of shape, I keep teasing her about it. But the one who went with the joke,
Yeah, you gotta have it. The first joke in your life has to be on yourself. When I got fired from the White House, which was absolutely brutal.
I'm sorry. You got fired from the White House. I did not hear about that.
Yeah. It was a minor incident in my life.
Never heard about that. What happened?
When Steve Colbert called me to go on the show, there were people in the public relations. They were like, "Oh, you can't do that." I'm like, "What are you ridiculous? Of course I'm going to do that." And when he said, "Hey, did you think you were going to last a long time in the White House?" I said, "Listen, longer than a carton of milk in the refrigerator. I didn't think I was going to get blown out before the milk spoiled." The point is that, like, if you can't recognize and have a sense of humor and be able to have a sense of humor about yourself, you're going to have a very rough life, okay? Because you're going to always be upset about things. When I went to the Met game, it was the Mets were playing the Yankees at Yankee Stadium. And I walked in, and Lorne Michaels was in the sort of the cafeteria area behind the legend seats. He was there with Paul Simon, the singer from Simon and Garfunkel. Turned out to be a great guy. We were sitting there, and he says to me, he's like, "Mooch," he goes, "Did you like the way we parodied you on Saturday Night Live?" And I looked at him, and I said, "Actually, I thought the guy needed more hairspray, and I didn't really like the way Bill Hader was tying his tie." The point being is, own it. You don't have to be a baby about things, and, have a thick skin and just roll with your life. The fact that you're sitting in that room right now and you have a nice suit or a nice dress on and you're going to such a great school, you've already won the lottery in life. And so just own it. That would be my recommendation.
I think it's a great point about not taking things too seriously, letting things roll off your back, especially probably because 90+% of the people in the audience someday will be married. So it's good training now to let things roll off your back and not take things too personally and not to have too thick of skin, because when you get married, it will be very good preparation for that as well.
Amen.
So we will jump into SkyBridge in a second, but for those folks in the audience who maybe do not know part of your bio, and I know you spoke about this publicly, but I think it's a great lesson that it's not the first or second inning that counts, it's the eighth or the ninth inning that counts. You mentioned it publicly before that you maybe weren't taking things seriously. You failed the bar exam twice and were fired from Goldman Sachs, and a lot of folks might have just thrown in the towel or something. Could you speak a little bit about that? I know you have before, and the lessons, how did it happen and lessons learned?
Yes, sure. And I'm happy to talk about it. So, but I want to lay it out for people. And, look, I mean, you can never be ashamed of your background either. You love your family, love your background. But I was in a polyester suit. I had bought it at a place called Sim. Some of your professors are probably old enough to remember it. It's like a discount clothing store. I had a polyester suit. I had a polyester shirt and a black Guido polyester tie for my first interview at Goldman Sachs. And I was at the Charles Hotel in Cambridge. Evan knows the place. And I was sitting across from two Goldman Sachs partners. And the one guy, he said, "Hey, can I see you for a second?" I got up, we walked outside together. He put I was fully flammable for the interview, right? I had all petroleum products I'm wearing, no natural fibers. And the guy looks at me and says, "Hey, you're a smart kid, but you are the worst dressed person that we've met at the Harvard Law School." And he's like, "You look like a young Undertaker from Brooklyn. Okay, I can't bring you dressed like this down to Goldman Sachs." Okay, I remember calling my mother. My mother was like, "What does that guy know? That's your best clothing, And I'm like, but he did know. He knew, and I did not know. And so I had to go out and buy myself a suit. And I went to Brooks Brothers. I remember getting a credit card because I didn't really have the money. And I bought myself a suit and a couple of shirts to go down to Goldman Sachs to get the interview. Why am I bringing that story up before I talk about failing the bar and stuff? Is that I was from a family. I'd never seen the inside of a country club. I never hit a golf ball, never swung a tennis racket, never saw the inside of a corporate office. And so a result of which I had to get up to speed very, very quickly. And so when I graduated from Harvard, I had accepted a job at Goldman Sachs. And I was probably very cocky and very immature. And I said, "Okay, well, I've never gotten a 65 on a test. before. You needed a 66 to pass the bar. And so I took it for granted. I went water skiing in Manhasset Bay out by my house. I was hanging out with my friends. My buddies from Harvard were studying for the bar. But I decided I wasn't going to do that because I wasn't going to practice law. And man, that was a ridiculous mistake. And so I failed that exam by one multiple choice question. And so when I got the test results back, I got a 65.6 on the exam. And New York State does not round up. And so I failed the bar. And it was a bummer. And it hurt my career at Goldman because I was now at Goldman and I didn't need to take the bar. But since I took the bar and I failed the bar, it wasn't a great look for me. The other thing I did, again, ridiculously stupid, we used to play something in the 80s called Series 7 Chicken.
Oh, yeah, I was going to bring that up. Yep.
Okay, so what is Series 7 Chicken? That is, there was 40 of us in the training class, and you needed a 72 to pass the registration exam to be registered as a broker at the broker-dealer that you worked at. It's Series 7's license. And so each person put $200 into the pot. It was an $8,000 pot. Okay, so this is 1989. There's a lot of money back then, particularly for somebody like me that didn't have much money and had a lot of school debt. And so the goal was to get the lowest score on the test without failing the test. And so I won that. Okay, I literally went back through the exam and I erased correct answers, and I dialed myself down to a 73 on the exam. And again, another ridiculously stupid thing. So the only person that was playing Series 7 Chicken that day was me. So the highest score on the test was 100. The average score for all these Goldman Sachs people coming out of Tufts and Harvard and all these places was a 92. And the lowest score besides my score at 73 was like a 91 or some ridiculous number like that. And I got the $8,000, but again, it hurt my career and it hurt my standing inside of Goldman. So it was ridiculous immaturity and ridiculous stupidity. And so when it was time to let people go during the recession of 1990 that led into the first Gulf War, I got fired. And I will never forget that day. My boss took me into his office and he said, listen, you're a good guy, but you're not really good at this job. We're going to let you go. They gave me an $11,000 severance check. And this is a lesson for you guys. I hope you'll, if you take a few things away from this conversation, take this. If you ever get fired from a job, be nice to the person that's firing. Trust me, they're having a bad day too. And so I said to my boss, I said, listen, if you could recommend me for something or that I could use you for a reference, I greatly appreciate it. He said, sure. I got fired on February 1st. I had the $11,000 severance check and I was now scrambling for a job. There were no cell phones back then. So I had a roll of quarters. I was putting it into pay phones in Grand Central Station, calling different people. One of my buddies says to me, well, there's a job opening at Goldman Sachs. And I said, really? I said, I just got fired from Goldman Sachs. Yeah, well, you got fired from the investment bank. This is in the sales and trading area. And I said, okay. And so the second call I made was to my old boss. And I said, listen, you just fired me on Friday. I said, but there's jobs available in this other area at Goldman. I would like to interview for them. Would you be willing to put in a good word for me? And he said, yes. And so I got fired from Goldman and then I got rehired. I got fired on February 1st. I got rehired on March 28th of 1991. And then the killer part of the story was personnel called me and they said, hey, listen, we got really good news for you. You're never going to have to tell anybody that you got fired. We're just going to mark you down as interdepartmental transfer. I said, okay, that's great. And then she drops the bomb. She's like, can we get the $11,000 check back, please? So I said, no. I said, I've already spent the money. I said, I had to buy more clothing. I mean, I had to get myself out of polyester, right? And I had to pay down some of my school debt. So I said, no. And so I kept the money. She was pretty cool about it, though. She still marked me down as departmental transfer. I didn't really have to tell people I got fired, but I like telling people that I got fired, frankly, because I think it's important for younger people to know that you can have a couple of missteps in your career. You don't have to be perfect. I know your social media page is filtered and you're taking, I don't even know why your generation does it, but you're taking pictures of like sushi and ice cream and stuff like that. And, you're trying to make yourself look perfect on social media, but your life isn't perfect. Okay. Nobody's life is perfect. Everybody is dealing with different things and struggles or whatever they may be. And I think it's important to be authentic. And I think it's important to let young people know you can get fired. You can have missteps in your career. You can do things that you regret, but you can still live a great life and you can go forward and explore the ample opportunities that are ahead of you, no matter what those shortfalls are or the potential kerfuffles in your life.
Yeah, that's a great point, 100% true. Somebody we're very close to once said, if you're driving from Florida to Maine and you're driving on the highway and you get lost somewhere around North Carolina, you don't say, screw it and I'm lost and drive back to Florida. You find your way back to the highway and maybe you got detoured a bit and you keep going towards Maine or wherever you're traveling. It's the same thing in life. You don't just throw in the towel. I will say one thing though, the only exception is don't ever embezzle client funds. That is not a good thing to do. That is one that's hard to recover from. And very few people on Wall Street do it, but just make a note that do not embezzle client funds. That's an important note.
Let me, if you're okay with this, Evan, I want to say something to these people, and I want them to hear this, because I have 5 children, and I have children that are your age, and I have children that are older than you guys. My dad worked 42 years as a crane operator. So he was in hot and cold weather here in the Northeast, worked on Long Island, and he paid his taxes and he paid his parking tickets and he paid his bills. And he used to have a great line that he used to say to us, if you can't afford the price of the ticket, don't go to the movies. And my dad was a very honorable person. I can remember one time, like, we were at the grocery store on Main Street in Port Washington. He got a parking ticket and he didn't even want to go home and pay it with a check. He walked up to the post office and got himself a money order to pay the parking ticket immediately. That was my dad. And I tell my kids this, and I'll share this with you. You never want to do anything to dishonor your family. You don't, I think of my dad and think about how hard he worked to give me the opportunity that I've had in life to pursue the American dream. There's nothing worth dishonoring him. There's nothing worth doing. There's no amount of money that the universe could give me to dishonor him or to hurt him or his reputation. And so what Evan is saying is, you not only do you not want to embezzle money, but you want to handle yourself with high integrity. People don't have to like you, by the way. What other people think of you is actually none of your business. And so if you learn that early, you can get yourself weaned off of social media and the comments, and you can get weaned off of the nonsense in your life, and you can focus on just being the best version of yourself. Some people like me, some people don't like my attitude. They find me polarizing. That's fine. I don't care. Okay. The people that I care about are the ones that I'm closest to and the ones that I love and hopefully love me. And you got to take that attitude in life and don't do anything wrong, because let me tell you something. If you have high integrity, you will always have opportunity. I got fired from Goldman. I got rehired. I got fired from the White House. I became best friends with the guy that fired me, General Kelly, who's a 4-star U.S. Marine. He's a general. He's a Gold Star family member. He lost his son in Iraq. He was the former head of the Homeland Security Department, White House Chief of Staff. He's become a very close personal friend. We're working on a number of veterans charities together. You can always have opportunity if you have setbacks, as long as you have integrity. I sold a piece of my business to Sam Bankman-Fried. Some of you may know who that is. He was the founder of FTX, a now failed cryptocurrency firm, trading firm. Devastating for me because I trusted him and I liked him. And it turned out he was doing exactly what Evan just said. He was embezzling people's money. And he's ruined forever. He's crushed his family. his mom and dad, who are tenured professors at Stanford. The family will not be able to recover from this type of atrocious behavior. But you know who will be able to recover? The good people at SkyBridge, the people that I work with, the people that help me build my company. I can't tell you the number of opportunities that have come our way since this happened, because we're running our business with high integrity. And so these are big, big lessons. Don't do anything to dishonor your mom and dad. It's just not worth it. All right, go ahead, Evan. I'm sorry I keep interrupting.
No, 100%. I mean, it's sort of what your parents tell you, don't do something you would not want to have on the front page of the New York Times, something like that. And there will be times as you proceed through your careers where you will have custody or access to millions or billions of dollars of client funds. And if something goes wrong, do you, quote, borrow from them? If you can't put it on the front page of the paper or wouldn't want it there, don't do it. And it's at all levels. I mean, I'm not getting into the details. You can Google it, but the vice chairman, 5-6 years ago, the vice chairman of Goldman Sachs was giving inside information to a hedge fund about Goldman earnings before they were released. The vice chairman already making 7-8 figures, who knows? And just, you've got to be kidding. You're giving your numbers before release to a hedge fund to curry favor, whatever. So think twice, sleep on it, ask your friends and family, ask a mentor. So I'm thinking of embezzling this money. What do you think? Is it okay? Ask them first. So I'll say one last thing too about growing up in a working class family. My dad went to college. My mom did not. My mom grew up in a poor family, and poor people did not go to college. And she was a woman. And poor girls from poor families definitely did not go to college. So it is really an amazing thing that I think everybody in this room is going to college or business school or something like that. And one thing about what it's like to get to college, if you come from a background where nobody has gone before, that type of thing. If you become successful, make a note of a great charity called the Posse Foundation, POSSE Foundation, the Posse Foundation. It basically helps mostly inner city kids who are going to typically very, how shall I say, white elite institutions get to some degree culturally adapted and to meet people going before they show up, because it can be a bit of a culture shock. So shout out to the Posse Foundation, POSSE Foundation. So jumping to SkyBridge, I guess you've had a SkyBridge, I think it was in 2005. I want to ask you, so what were, Anthony, the goals and objectives in forming SkyBridge, and what went right, what went sideways, what went wrong, and how is it different today than it was, whatever that is, 18 years ago?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I founded SkyBridge on the 7th of March in 2005. The goal at SkyBridge at that time was to buy into and create equity interest for my LPs in hedge funds. And so I was going to help new hedge funds get started, and I was going to share the economics and the growth. The industry was growing at that time. And it seemed like a pretty good idea. So not only would you have your money run by the hedge fund manager, but you would share in their fees. One of my friends by the name of Dan Ock had done something similar with the Ziff family. They called the firm Ock Ziff. The family owned a piece of the business alongside of him, and he ran their money, and then he shared a piece of his fees from the other people's money that he was running. And the business got started with about $350 million of capital back in 2005. It was a great little start. We seeded about 7 or 8 managers. And then unfortunately, and some of you are probably old enough to remember this, we got caught in the 2008, 2009 global financial crisis. Many of the banks were under trouble. Stock market went down, I think 50%, the S&P 500. The business was really hurt by that. And a lot of the hedge funds that I started, frankly, went out of business. And so it was the end of 2008. And I was thinking about what to do with the company. And the company was in a very fragile position at that point. And so we did 2 things. The first thing that we did is we launched a conference business because all of the major banks were leaving the conference space. And my partners and I felt, well, we needed a conference, sort of a hedge fund industry conference. Many of the large banks were receiving government money through this program known as TARP. And so then President Obama, I don't think he did this on purpose, but he basically said, okay, now's not the time to go to Las Vegas to have a conference. I think he said it well intended, but what ended up happening was everybody canceled their conferences. And so what was happening in Las Vegas, it was hurting middle-class people. It was hurting the porters and maids and bartenders and restaurant waiters and waitresses. And so I said, okay, why don't we do a conference in Vegas? We'll take advantage of these low prices and we'll see what happens. And if the conference is a success, that's great. And if it isn't, we didn't really know at the time. And that conference business is now 14 years old. It's turned out to be quite successful, but we didn't really know at the time. So it was an experiment. And then the second thing that we did was we went to some investment bankers and said, well, these large banks have to sell assets. Are there any assets at these large banks that we could potentially buy and merge into SkyBridge? Because the original concept that we started with hedge fund seeding, frankly, was not working, and it got really hurt by the 2008 crisis. And one of the bankers said to me, well, Citibank has to sell their fund of funds business. And so I negotiated with Citi over an 18-month period of time, and I bought their fund of funds business and closed on that transaction in July of 2010. So it's almost 13 years ago. And I brought that staff over, and we turned SkyBridge into a fund of funds and a conference business. In 2020, when we went through the COVID-19 crisis, which really, we had a devastating period of time in March of 2020. I would tell you that the worst year of my life financially was the month of March of 2020. So we compressed the whole year's worth of horror into a 1-month period of time. And it was there and then that I said that we have to adapt our business again. We have to pivot our business. And so I made the decision to pivot some of the business into digital assets, cryptocurrencies, some of which include Bitcoin and Ethereum. I have a couple of other assets as well. That looked like a genius move, in 2021, where we had fantastic performance, but it looked like a terrible move in 2022, which of course we had a bear market again. But I would say to you, you have to be patient. As I tell my clients, everybody's a long-term investor until they have short-term losses. But I think we're very well positioned right now coming into 2023. And this first quarter, Evan, for SkyBridge is probably the best quarter that we've had since I opened the company.
That's great. Congratulations. Not just to regress for just a second, for those in the audience who have not seen polyester suits before, you can rent Saturday Night Fever, the movie with John Travolta.
Yeah.
I think probably some good examples of what Anthony's referring to in Saturday Night Fever.
There was some old school stuff, but it was also the irony of that. My mom, who's now 86, God bless her, she thought I had a really nice suit. But trust me, the people at Goldman Sachs did not think that, and that was a big learning lesson back then.
There was also a very old school Windows PC game called Leisure Suit Larry, which you probably can't find anymore, but you could probably Google Leisure Suit Larry. There was a lot of polyester in that. So, SkyBridge has been around for, I guess, several crises. Obviously, the 2008, 2009 financial crisis, the Madoff crisis, and then also some other fun stuff where, with quantitative easing and easy money, the S&P was going straight up, and I think hedge funds had a tough time distinguishing themselves when you could throw darts at a dartboard and make 15, 20% a year. So how did SkyBridge cope with the financial crisis, the Madoff crisis, quantitative easing? Any lessons learned, mistakes made during some of those periods that affected everybody?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, I would say, listen, you are planning your life and then God's laughing, meaning, or as Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they're punched in the face. And then, of course, they have to change their plan. And so I would say to you that as an entrepreneur, some things have gone very, very well for SkyBridge and for me, and some other things have not gone very well. And Bill Ackman may recognize that name. He's a friend of mine. He runs something called Pershing Square. He said something on Twitter about 3 months ago, and I thought, wow, that is a really good insight, and it's a good insight that he should be sharing with younger people. And so I'll share it with you guys. What he basically said is that the best, most successful people are the ones that can endure failure, and they can work through failure to the other side, to the eventual success. Elon Musk, on the verge of bankruptcy in 2008, scraping money together to keep Tesla and SpaceX alive. Bill Gates, the first operating system that he offered to IBM failed. He had to go back to the drawing board. He ended up borrowing several $100,000 from his dad to purchase an operating system from another company. Michael Dell, his computers were catching on fire in 1993. His stock went from 41 to 7. He stayed in there and he built this computer company that was monolithic. Steve Jobs, fired from Apple Computer, and then rehired into Apple Computer to build the situation. I could give you so many examples. Jeff Bezos, one of the most successful, smartest, and richest people in the world, almost lost his business in the 2000 NASDAQ bubble. The Amazon stock went from 116 to 8. And I remember Barron's, the newspaper article, basically said, the age of Amazon is over. They were calling the company Amazon.bomb. And of course, Jeff Bezos shot himself into outer space last year. So the point being, and I think Bill Ackman's point and the examples that I'm giving you, is that you have to stay in things and you have to expect turbulence and ups and downs and setbacks. And don't over idealize your life, or don't expect your life to end up or arc perfectly. You have to expect that there's going to be a lot of up and down movements in your life, and that you endure and you get through those to the other side, and enjoy the journey of it, the ups and downs of it, if you will. And I think that's what we've had to do at SkyBridge.
I think it's a great point. I use the analogy about a basketball game with some people in our team. Team A wins the basketball game. It is almost never the case that Team A was ahead the entire game that they ended up winning. It's extremely rare. It does happen, of course, but usually 90-some% of the time they were up, they were down, and it was not a straight up. Anthony, you actually brought up something I do want to mention to the folks in the audience. It's one of, I think, the best lessons we can convey, and it came up because you guys used to seed hedge funds. And give me this maybe 30 seconds, but I think it's critical. If you ever start a hedge fund, if you ever start a company, and you're potentially going to get a seed deal or a venture deal or some kind of early stage deal, there's two kinds of mistakes you can make. You can take money from a seeder or from a VC that's, quote, air quotes, too expensive, and dilute yourself and regret it one day because you took too much money and you diluted yourself and you gave away too much of your company or your hedge fund. The other mistake you can make is walking away from the money, and turns out you need it a year, 18 months, 2 years later, and you regret that. I want to get Anthony's view, but I've been on Wall Street for 20 years, and I can say that for those who regretted one of those errors, 100% regretted not taking the money when they had it, even though it was, quote, too expensive. They needed it years later, and they were in big trouble. They couldn't get it a couple years later because the markets changed. 0%. I've actually never met anybody who took the money, even though it was expensive, and regretted it because they ended up becoming rich and famous and only had 60% of a massive company instead of 72. And the reason this came up, Anthony, is there was a guy, I honestly do not remember his name, who said that the biggest mistake he ever made is when you and SkyBridge were seeding hedge funds, he had a seed deal with you. He was, quote, air quotes, too expensive, and he turned it down, and he never recovered. So would you agree with what I said? I mean, take the money you can get it, build a company, build a fund?
I think so. I think also, I have found in my career that I have taken money and gotten help. I sold a piece of my business to an Australian billionaire by the name of James Packer. He went on to help me with the Citibank acquisition. He was also there for me in 2008. We had to get a loan from him to help fund that acquisition. And I think so. And I think if you're with the right venture capitalists or you're with the right seeding people, what they do is they not only give you the money, but they also give you their ecosystem, they give you their relationships, and they try to help you build the business. So I think you're right about that, Evan. But, listen, I mean, here's the beauty of all of this. We don't know. One of the things I learned in the government is how little we know. I don't like being critical of people at the Federal Reserve or people in the government, because after reading the intelligence briefs or the economic reports, you would be astonished at how little we know. I mean, I think it was a 60% probability that Osama bin Laden was in the house that our Navy SEAL team raided. We didn't really know. I think Jerome Powell, looking at the economic data that he's looking at, he doesn't really know. He's doing his best. He's got great intentions, but he doesn't really know. And I think we're very hard on these people. And so again, you could take the money and it could work out, or you could take the money and it may not work out, or you could not take the money and it could work out or not work out. But I think it's very important for us not to be too hard on ourselves, I think is the message.
Fair enough. I just know that there are so many people who get so wed to their equity, whether it's a hedge fund or whether it's a company, that they're so concerned about having 99 or whatever percent of their company. But Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs and Bill Gates did not build trillion-dollar companies by keeping 100% of the equity. Some people are so wed to it that they refuse to give up a couple of percent or whatever it is, and they never get anywhere. So I think it's a lesson learned for everybody. A couple of quick questions about SALT, if I may. The first one, of course, and I could not find this anywhere. It was not in your Wikipedia. Couldn't find it. Who gets credit for coming up with the great name and the great SALT acronym?
So, I don't want to overly take credit for that, but I think I actually came up with it because we were coming up with different ideas, and it's a weird name because it's not a full acronym. It's the S stands for SkyBridge and the ALT stands for alternatives. And, my staff didn't like it, actually. I said, we should call this thing SALT. And, the young kids in the room won't remember this, Evan, but you would. That you stood for in the 70s, the strategic, what was it called again? Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, right? Strategic Arms Limitation Talks. In fact, when George Bush spoke at SALT, he said to me, hey, Anthony, is this the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks? No one remembers that anymore. And I didn't think people would remember that, so I thought it was okay. And then my team teased me and they said, well, someone's going to start the Pepper Conference. And so I ended up buying that, actually. I own the pepperconference.com, actually. But anyway, here's the thing about names. You just got to pick a name and you go with the name. There's made up names like Lexus, it now stands for something. You just have to pick a name and go with it.
Fair enough. But I am a recovering lawyer. That may have come up in the introductions. Formerly an intellectual property lawyer, patents, trademarks, copyrights. So one small footnote. When you do form your hedge fund, when you do form your company, before you adopt the name, do go see a trademark lawyer in advance so you don't end up in depot lawyer afterwards. So check your local trademark lawyer. So at SALT, you've had an incredible range of speakers, famous, everyone from people in sports, entertainment, former presidents, the arts. Since they've spoken in public, I guess, I can ask you, who are maybe the one or two or three who said something the most insightful, inspiring, surprising, downright funny over the years? Any one or two come to mind?
Well, so many, I guess, I'm thinking about what Donald Trump said, actually. He's in the news right now. I've had my ups and downs with Mr. Trump. We started out as friends, and then, obviously we're in a little bit of a fight now because I obviously don't think you should try to overthrow the U.S. government. It's probably not the best thing for people to think about doing. And if you lose an election, you should probably not be a baby about it. But he said something that was really funny to me. I was in the White House with him. We were in the study off the Oval Office. The White House is quite small, actually. That's another weird thing about the White House. Again, I grew up in a blue collar neighborhood, so I thought the White House was going to be this gigantic thing. It's like these rooms are reasonably small. The building was built in like the early 1800s. And we're in this little tiny study, and he's looking at me and he says, I thought I was a killer. He says, I thought I was in a really tough business. I was a New York real estate guy, and these New York real estate guys were all sharks and they were all killers. He said that Washington, the secretaries here would like carve those people up, meaning that like Washington was so much more difficult than New York real estate. And it was so much more vicious. And it was an insight. He said it, and you guys aren't laughing, but it was funnier to me, I guess, at the time, because I was getting eviscerated in the press. And it was like this whole different culture and a different way that people handle each other. You know, like I said, man, these are all backstabbers. I said, in New York, we're like front stabbers. You know, we tell people to their face what we think. You know, you had people in Washington, they would literally pick your eyeball out with a spear and they would drop it in their dirty martini glass. You're bleeding at the table. You're like bleeding at the table and they're still talking to you like nothing happened. I mean, that was Washington, you know? So, you know, that was an insight. That was funny. I would say to you that President George W. Bush had a great sense of humor. He always saw the drier side of things in terms of the way things worked. There was a conversation about they had gone to a state dinner in Japan and they served a certain kind of wine, and then they went to the UK and Queen Elizabeth served them a different kind of wine, and he said to the Queen, "Oh, you know, I just had a similar wine in Japan," and she said, "Oh, that was a worse vintage. When I read their wine list, I had to make sure you had a better vintage." You know, it's like this sort of like stuff that people think about that is like, I don't know, things that I never thought about as a kid. I frankly still don't think about. But yeah, I mean, listen, here's the thing. I've had a lot of public failures because I'm a high profile person, and the press won't write about the successes, and you got to be cool with that. But I have loved every minute of this life experience. You know, I've had the opportunity to do a White House press conference. Evan mentioned I've been on a few reality shows. I mean, I was in the desert last summer with Mike Piazza, the former Met Hall of Fame catcher, Danny Amendola, the Super Bowl champ, Dwight Howard. We were getting tortured by these former Navy SEALs for television. I mean, it's fun. For me, it's fun. And I've had these different varying life experiences. But with that, you have to take the arc of some of the volatility that comes with it. But yeah, I think Trump had, and whatever you think of Trump, you like him, you dislike him. I know there's like a lot of polarity to Trump. He is a smart guy and he is very insightful on a lot of these sorts of things.
Yeah, although I will say that one thing about Trump, and we're not going to get too into it, is I've seen a lot of folks on Wall Street who are extremely bright, but sometimes they can be a bit too confident. So for example, major failures, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, long-term capital. If you told someone in 2007 that Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns would be bankrupt in a couple of years, they would have had you committed as being certifiably insane. Major firms on Wall Street. And it's the same thing. How did Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, and long-term go under? It wasn't because they got all their positions wrong. No, they made a lot of stupid decisions. No, they were over-levered and over-concentrated, and what could possibly go wrong? So be careful, because no matter how smart you are, you keep some humility. For example, we run this world's #1 ranked hedge fund, and we basically have a couple of partners who are extremely humble and modest because they make a lot of money because they're smart, but they keep the money and don't give it back because they're humble. They don't do revenge trading. They don't think they know it all. And there have been some times where we've just said, we're not sure what's going on in the markets. We go to cash, because if we're not sure what's going on, we're not going to put investors' money at risk. That's also a good point too. So, you know, whether you're a hedge fund manager, Donald Trump, or anybody else, know what you know, but don't think you know everything, because that's when you make those kind of fatal mistakes. And look at Lehman and look at Bear Stearns and look at long-term, which you never would have thought. But if you would put on, what were the credit default swaps on Lehman, you could have gotten 1,000,000 to 1 odds that Lehman would be bankrupt in a year. So, you know, keep some humility. Quick question, Anthony. Can you go over a little bit, or how's your time?
You know, I'm good.
Okay, now I said to the conference organizers, I know Anthony, we could probably go all night. So we have the hotel through Monday, not a problem. We're good for a few extra minutes. One question I want to ask you, my wife and I, thank God, just had a daughter. She's turning 9 months old. So you've had a television show, Wall Street Week. You're appearing on TV. You're running SkyBridge. You have a bunch of other business interests. You own or are part owner of Hunt and Fish, a great restaurant about 10 blocks south of that for all the people in the audience. Feel free to check it out. The food's great, great ambiance. how do you find time between traveling all over the world and being in the desert to really have time with your wife, your kids, your friends? I mean, how can you pull that off?
Well, I think part of being an entrepreneur is, unfortunately, you're always working. But the second part of being an entrepreneur, you have a little bit of flexibility about where you're working. And so sometimes you get the good luck of technology where I'm able to make a presentation like this, even though I'm not physically present in the room. Other times I would tell you that I delegate a tremendous amount of stuff. And so the guys that run SALT, the men and women, it's their business. They're the CEO of that business, not me. I'm there to serve them. The guys that are running the fund, it's their business. I'm here to help them. And so a result of which, if you put people in place where you give them a lot of power and autonomy to run things, and then you're in a sort of servant leader position, you can do a lot more. You don't want to be, Evan, and I would say this to younger people, you don't want to be a bottleneck. You don't want to have a company where every single decision of importance has to come through you. If that happens, then you're dead. You become a overly detailed OCD control freak.
Fair enough. You did jump out of a plane, was it once on a TV show? Is that right or not?
A helicopter. Yeah, I had a back dive out of a helicopter into the Red Sea. Yeah. I mean, I'm afraid of heights. So that's another big thing. Like I should have never wrote on the application for that show that I was afraid of heights. I mean, these guys put me I had to do a 460-foot vertical drop with some other guy braking for me. And then they had me running up a tower. Then I had to rappel down the side of the tower. I mean, I was scared shit. I mean, it was sort of stupid in hindsight, but the point being that you can control your fear. You can control your emotions. You can push yourself. You shouldn't have any limitations in your brain. Like right now, maybe some third grade teacher told you that you can't read right, or you don't do math. I don't know what it is, or you're an introvert or an extrovert. You shouldn't have any limitations in your mind. You should be thinking to yourself, okay, I can do this. Okay, I've been afraid of heights my whole life, but I jumped out of a helicopter that was hovering about 35 feet above the Red Sea, and I back dived into I had full military gear on, and I back dived into the water. And, I controlled my fear to do that. I mean, it was probably stupid to do that. I'm not saying it wasn't stupid, but that's a judgment issue. I'm really talking about more controlling your fear and broadening yourself and not having many limitations.
Because there are several folks, typically, I guess, professional athletes, where their teams do have certain no clauses in their contract, like a no parachuting clause and a no skydiving clause and some other things that are considered, no window washing clause or whatever it is. Have any SkyBridge investors ever said either we'd like you not to jump out of planes or to spend less time on TV and more time in the office, or hasn't come up?
No, I mean, I think people like having me out of the office. They think I'm a pain in the ass when I'm in the office. You know what I mean? I think they're relieved that I'm not around sometimes, I had one of my reviews at Goldman that was actually a funny review, which is totally true. My old boss said I was high impact with low frequency, but I'm low impact with high frequency. People get sick of me. I mean, I wear them down, I don't think they really like having me in the office.
Well, you just said that this is Q1 2023 was one of SkyBridge's best quarters. So since you're probably doing more than ever, and you guys just had the best quarter with you there less than ever, that may prove the point. I don't know.
Yeah, right. May prove the point. Maybe I just stay out of the office more.
So to dive into some details on hedge funds, somebody, maybe more than one person, said very wise, hedge funds are not really an asset class because there's so many different things. There's long, short, event-driven, momentum, mean reversion, quant, this, that kind of thing. This may be a little bit too inside baseball, but I think some people will probably know about some of the different hedge fund strategies. Are there any ones that you particularly at SkyBridge focus on, avoid? Because there really is a wide variety. Any particular ones at all that you found better or worse over the years, or it just depends on the manager?
So it's a really good question. And I would say not only does it depend on the manager, it depends on the time in the market cycle. So Evan, you and I are old enough to remember when the great macro managers in the 90s were doing so well. But after the Federal Reserve inducted all the money into the system. Long short managers and macro managers did less well. Guys like structured credit managers and convertible arbitrage people did better. So yes, there are all seasoned managers that can do well in any and all environments, but some of it is environmental and some of it's driven by the macro forces that are taking place in the overall global economy.
Fair enough. Timing in life often is everything. One question on my list, not sure if you have any interesting insights, is I guess the regulation of hedge funds. Maybe not the most sexy topic, maybe to some. Do you see any changes coming in the regulation of hedge funds, more or less? And if you were the nation's top regulator, would you change anything with hedge fund regulation as it stands now?
So yes, I think the industry was under the focus of the regulators probably 10 years ago. I think the regulators are very focused on the digital space now and the cryptocurrency space. And so I think you're getting a pass right now, on regulation in the hedge fund level. I don't think there's going to be much that changes. They've got their attention focused elsewhere.
This is basically if you're running in the woods and the bear is chasing you and your friend, you just have to be faster than your friend with the bear in the woods. Same thing. Okay. Question about artificial intelligence. Back in the day, I was a young, literally a teenager, writing columns on artificial intelligence when nobody knew what it was back then. It was completely underestimated back then. Now in 2023, 2022, 2023, everyone's talking artificial intelligence, although a very fascinating study in the UK actually found out that half the companies that claim to be doing artificial intelligence and machine learning are not. But that said, what are your views regarding AI, and ML, and hedge funds? What are you seeing from funds that claim to be or are doing AI and ML? Are some incredibly great? Are some overrated? What are your thoughts? Have you been seeing a lot of this?
Yes, I think that some are overrated, some are really good. There's been a massive consolidation in the space. And there's been some commoditization. The larger players are earning a lot of fees, so they don't want to make any big mistakes. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, that's why I think you guys have really stood out with your wonderful performance because, I'm not saying you're taking too much risk, you're not, but you're smaller and sort of more nimble and you're less indexed, if you will. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. If the audience doesn't know, we actually trade only currency. So no equities, no bonds, no commodities. So
there you go.
No correlation to the S&P. We're not trading stocks, we're not trading bonds. 2022 was obviously an interesting year. There was in the early part of 2022, Omicron broke out, then Russia invaded Ukraine. Inflation was present for the first time significantly in years, rising interest rates. According to Citgo, which is one of the big hedge fund administrators, one of the big ones, in 2022, the S&P was down 19.44%. The Citgo hedge funds were down, air quotes only, down only in air quotes, 7%. And actually, Citgo's median return was 2.86. So the smaller hedge funds did even better, proving what most people don't know or should know, that smaller hedge funds tend to outperform because, like Anthony said, they're more nimble, they're hungrier, and so forth. So, for 10 years of quantitative easing, easy money, the S&P is going straight up. Hedge fund managers are hard to differentiate themselves because you can throw darts at a dartboard and make 10, 15% a year in most cases. So then the S&P is down almost 20, the average hedge fund's down 7, but that's a 13% improvement. Is this the beginning again of people, and I say people, institutional investors, family offices, waking up and saying, gee, Wally, the S&P can go down again? And, people don't remember, people drink too much. They say they're not going to drink too much again, and they do it, that type of thing. So has it taken another bear market to really remind CIOs at universities and endowments that one of the principal factors of hedge funds is not just to outperform during up markets, but as importantly to outperform in down markets, which is why they're called a hedge fund? What's your take on all of that?
So, this is just my opinion, so just take it for what it's worth. I think the word hedge fund means something different than what it originally meant. I think, the A.W. Jones model, which was started in 1949 of a hedge fund, was, you were taking positions that were fairly hedged with each other. I now think that that's not the case, that these are just investment vehicles or these investment limited partnerships. So I don't think people look at it anymore like that. I think a lot of these things are frankly directional.
Yeah, I mean, somebody said that hedge funds or anything that trades something publicly and charges 2 and 20 is a hedge fund, which leaves tons of room for every strategy conceivably there. But I will share one thing personally. We've compounded at over 60% for 7 years. We got a lot of attention from early years, but we've actually gotten probably more attention after 2022, 2023, when we had our quote disaster year last year. I love saying it, our air quotes disaster year. We were up about 26%. The S&P was down 20. And all of a sudden, you get a lot more attention because most allocators, if they can make 15 or 20%, they're fine. They don't need anybody. They're fine. They can sleep at night. But it was sort of when the markets are down 20, and you start getting attention if you're not correlated. So I think that it has definitely helped us. One question I wanted to ask you is about perception of hedge funds. This is just sort of the interviewer's question. One of my pet peeves is, if you ask people what hedge funds are, Google it. Even some of the mainstream publications misstate it constantly. It drives me nuts. I won't mention any names. Wall Street Journal. I will not mention any names, but you Google it and it says a hedge fund is a lightly regulated fund that uses lots of leverage and therefore is very risky. And I just smack my forehead every time I see that because, as you well know, maybe 20, 30 years ago, hedge funds were lightly regulated. They certainly are not now. Maybe with all the crypto fires, we're getting a free pass, maybe not. Most hedge funds do not use a lot of leverage, 2 to 3 to 1 maybe. I mean, long term was 100 to 1, and look what happened to them. So most hedge funds are not lightly regulated. They don't use a lot of leverage, and they actually are less risky. Citgo's average hedge fund was down 7% in 2022, not 20%. And it's just one of my pet peeves. Is there any, and I spent 7 years on the board of the Hedge Fund Association, and we consider sort of these public perceptions. I mean, do you face this ever? Does it drive you nuts? How can the hedge fund industry kind of make the point that we're actually less risky with typically better returns, or is the die already cast? Is it too late to change the perception?
I think so. I think it's too late to change it. I think it's a pretty well documented industry at this point, and it's reminiscent of what Bill Parcells, the old Hall of Fame football coach, used to say. You know, you're only as good as your record, and I think it's reflected there.
Fair enough. So I want to. I haven't gotten Osman's permission to have you back in 10 years. I did the math. That would be Game Forum XX11 or II, Game 22, taking place in March of 2033. Assuming we can get Osman's invitation, bearing in mind Yogi Berra's famous quote, "I'm not good at making predictions, especially about the future." What do you think hedge funds will look like 10 years from now, from anything from asset flows to regulations to strategies, the size of the firm, anything at all? And if we do come back in 10 years, we will check you on this. So what do you think in 5 or 10 years, hedge funds may look different than they are today?
So I'm terrible at making these predictions, because if you had asked me that 10 years ago, the industry had $2 trillion in it. And I would have said in 2013, by 2023, that the industry would have 6-7 trillion. It now has about 4 trillion. So the industry has actually shrunk, believe it or not, because if you look at the S&P growth and you look at the growth of assets globally, it hasn't adjusted for inflation. It hasn't adjusted for all of that growth. And so I don't know. I don't know if the industry is going to be bigger or smaller. I guess the only thing I would say definitively is that the industry will be here. I have to apologize to you guys, Ed, because I'm bumping up against a 12:15 where I have to get to that presentation.
Okay, fair enough. Then we'll wrap up maybe with just maybe two last questions, and thank you very much for your time again.
Oh, my pleasure. I appreciate you guys having me.
Let's see. Okay, last 2 questions. Career advice to students who are looking to get into hedge funds. I counted and took notes of maybe 3 potential options. Going from college straight to a hedge fund, if you can pull that one off. Maybe getting some, air quotes, basic training at one of the rotations at a big Wall Street firm like Morgan Stanley, where my wife worked for 17 years, plug. Or C, even forming your own hedge fund. And one student at Wharton who I'm in touch with actually has formed his own hedge fund. I become a bit of a mentor to him. And quick footnote, get a mentor in whatever industry you go into. Just find someone who's willing to dedicate some time to you, a phone call every couple of months, a cup of coffee every 6 months. And I sort of mentored him. He's actually running his own hedge fund out of Wharton. What's your advice about what to do to get in? Straight to the hedge fund, basic training at Goldman or Oregon, or form your own fund yourself?
So, I have a 31-year-old son that went to form his own fund, but I think he had the benefit of me as his dad and had the benefit of me helping him do that, and providing some capital and so forth. But unless you have a benefactor or somebody in the family or someone you're close to that can help you do it that way, I think it's better to go into a business for a period of time and get some mentoring.
Yeah, that's my advice. My advice is go to the biggest bank you can get into, go into the training, the rotational programs, take in as much knowledge and experience as you can take in like a sponge. And then, a couple of years, 3, 5, 6, whatever years later, you can figure out what you want to do, at that point. The last question now, thank you for your time, is one that my wife and I have an over-under bet on. So there's actually money riding on this. I actually may make money on game. Won't tell you how much, but you're on TV a lot, appearing on shows, commenting, and so forth. Your hair is always perfect. How often do you get it cut?
All right, so, what was your wife's bet, if you don't mind? What did your wife say?
I won't say who has which side, but the over-under is roughly about 1 week.
Okay, yeah, no, all right. So I get it cut probably every 3 or 4 weeks.
Okay.
I'm just so happy at my age that it's growing back.
It still looks great. Last question, Al, thank you. It's a tough one, so save time for the thank yous. You may have heard, it didn't get a lot of attention, but former President Trump is going to be indicted. Being sensitive to people in the room who may love him, hate him, or somewhere in between, I guess 3 questions, I'll put them all out. A, do you think that he broke the law with the Stormy Daniels case? 2, if you were the prosecutor, would you bring the case even if he did? And 3, compared to some of the other more serious things, is this the one that the government should have hanged their hat on? And if you don't want to speak to it publicly, I'll respect that. But if you have any thoughts that you're willing to say, that would be great.
So, listen, I think Trump is like a lunatic, and he definitely should not be president. And he's obviously a lunatic. But here's what I would say. If it's about Stormy Daniels and that money case, it's probably a specious case. And I think it's probably politically motivated to bring a case if it's about that. If it's about transgressions that he made in his business, where his CFO has now flipped on him, Alan Weisselberg, and has explained all of the different things that they did that were fraudulent inside the business, and there are 34 counts of fraud, I think it's a more serious case, and I think they're going to bring it, and I think it's going to be hurtful to Donald Trump. If it's only about that one piece of stuff, I think it'll help him actually. But if it isn't, if it's about something more, I think it's going to hurt him.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that the story.
I don't like it because he's the former president, and you should just leave him alone. And if he runs for president and he wins again, too bad for us. If we're really that stupid, then you get the politicians you deserve. If you're really that stupid, then have him run again. But I will campaign against them. You will unfortunately have to see my mug on a lot of national television, because I have to explain to people how malevolent and dishonest and all this nonsense on like Fox and these other stupid shows trying to prop him up. The people that really work with him know how nuts he is, and you have to explain it to people. Even if you're a Republican like I am and you like some of the policies, you can't have a nut job that hates democracy running the country. Okay. You just can't. It's just a very bad thing. It's very bad look for the country, particularly right now in this inflection point in history, given everything that's going on in the world.
Just to clarify,
I got to bump out of here. I'm sorry, guys. Thank you.
Can I thank you? Can I thank
so
you
much for having me? All right, and I wish you great career success.
30 seconds.
What's that, Ed?
I'm going to thank you for 15 seconds. ChatGPT wrote this thank you to you. Oh, the
Okay.
guests we invite to our forum of game. They come from all over, each one with a name. But the one we have here today is truly quite grand. A man with a mission and a hedge fund in hand. Anthony Scaramucci is his name you see, founder of SkyBridge, as famous as can be. He spoke to our students with such wit and such charm and shared all of his wisdom like a true finance czar. The fireside chat was filled with great tips on how to invest and where to find the best flips. He told us of markets and how they can change and how to spot trends before they get strange. The students were thrilled to hear from this star, a man with a passion for finance and the bar. He spoke of his journey and how he found his way and left all of us with a message to help us seize the day. So we thank you, Mr. Scaramucci, for being our guest and sharing with us your knowledge with zest. We hope to see you again at our forum of game, for you truly are a finance expert of fame. Anthony from ChatGPT.
Yeah, I mean, you know, should have a love affair with the ChatGPT. That probably should send flowers. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anthony.
Bye.